Most people believe poverty is only about having no money, but the truth is far more painful. Poverty slowly teaches the world to look past you, as if you are invisible. It's on a freezing winter morning in a quiet industrial area of Birmingham. A barefoot boy stood outside a closed bakery, pressing his small hands against a cold glass. He was not staring at the bread inside. He was stealing warmth from the ovens that had been turned off hours ago. That boy's name was Ethan Collins, and no one on that street believed he would ever rise above the life he was born into. Ethan's childhood was shaped by absence and exhaustion. His father died in a factory accident when Ethan was only 7, leaving behind silence where laughter once lived. His mother cleaned offices, hospitals, and private homes, often working 2 shifts a day. She returned home long after midnight, her hands rough and cracked from chemicals, eyes heavy with the tiredness that sleep never cured. Some nights, dinner was nothing more than dry toast. On other nights, they drank water and pretended it was enough. Hunger never screamed in their home, Kay whispered, slowly shrinking dreams before they had a chance to grow. At school, Ethan became used to being unnoticed. He wore the same faded jacket every winter and learned to sit quietly so teachers would not call attention to him. When his stomach growled during exams, classmates laughed, and he learned to stare at his desk until the sound passed. Yet, he never skipped school. Not because he loved learning, but because the school library was warm, and warmth felt like safety. He spent hours between shelves, reading whatever books were left behind by students who had better places to go. One evening, while helping the librarian stack returned books, Ethan found an old, torn biography of a man who had grown up poor and built something meaningful from nothing. Ethan struggled to understand every word. One sentence stayed with him like a quiet promise. No one rescued me. I learned to rescue myself. From that day on, Ethan stayed late in the library, reading about machines, businesses, and people who had failed more times than they had succeeded. When the library closed, he copied pages by hand and read them at home by dim light, as if knowledge itself could keep the cold away. As a teenager, Ethan began collecting broken electronics from rubbish bins and abandoned garages. Old radios, cracked phones, and useless-looking devices became his teachers. He learned how wires spoke to each other, how patience could fix what force could not. At first, he repaired things only to understand them, but one day, a neighbor insisted on paying him £5 for fixing a phone. That small note felt heavier in his hand than any treasure he had ever imagined, not because of its value, but because it proved that his effort mattered. Life, however, did not soften just because Ethan was trying. When he was 16, his mother fell ill, and medical bills crushed what little stability they had. Ethan left school to work nights at a warehouse, lifting boxes until his hands cracked and his back burned. During the day, he repaired electronics from a small table in their kitchen, often fighting sleep just to finish one more job. He lived in a cycle of exhaustion, but quitting was never an option because hunger never waited. One rainy afternoon, Ethan walked into a local electronics shop, hoping to sell his repair services. The owner glanced at his worn clothes and laughed. He told Ethan that boys like him did not run businesses, that poverty followed people like a shadow they could never escape. Ethan walked home in silence, rain soaking his jacket and his pride equally. That night, sitting alone in the dark, he came dangerously close to giving up, but hunger, once again, spoke louder than doubt. Using discarded parts and borrowed tools, Ethan set up a small repair station at home. He wrote handwritten notes and taped them to street poles and notice boards offering cheap and honest repair services. Days passed without customers, then weeks. When the first customer finally arrived, Ethan treated the job with a seriousness that surprised even himself. He charged fairly, spoke honestly, and refused money for work he could not complete. Slowly, trust grew. Then, word spread. Soon, he had more work than he could handle. By his early 20s, Ethan's reputation reached someone who saw beyond his background. A small business owner noticed Ethan's discipline and offered him a partnership in a refurbishing operation. Fear whispered that he did not belong in rooms where decisions were made. But experience had taught him that fear was simply another form of hunger. He accepted the offer and worked harder than ever, reinvesting every pound and refusing shortcuts that promised quick gains. Years passed quietly, marked by long hours and careful choices. The business expanded across cities, focusing on affordable, refurbished electronics for people who could not afford new ones. By the time Ethan turned 30, he employed more than 100 people, many from backgrounds as difficult as his own. Wealth arrived, but it did not change him. He remembered what it felt like to be unseen. Later in life, Ethan funded libraries in struggling neighborhoods and paid school fees for children who reminded him of himself. When asked about luck, he simply said that luck never knocked on his door, but discipline did. He understood that poverty had delayed his journey, but it had not defined his worth. What carried him forward was patience, honesty, and the refusal to surrender when the world expected him to disappear.